Maggie's wedding ring hit the dirty diner table with a sound that broke 5 years of silence. "Sign it," Derek said, not even looking at her hospital scrubs still stained from her 12-hour shift. "I found someone who actually fits my future." She had $43 in her bank account. She had just been evicted. She had worked double shifts for 3 years to pay for his law degree. And in 72 hours, she would discover that the grandmother who abandoned her had left behind a $1.8 billion empire with one condition. If you want to see how a forgotten nurse becomes the most powerful woman in Seattle, subscribe now, follow this story to the very end, and comment your city below. Let me see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights of Rosie's diner buzzed like dying insects. Maggie Thornton didn't hear them. She didn't hear the coffee machine hissing, or the cook scraping the grill, or the old couple arguing about their check in booth 7. All she heard was Derek's voice. "You're not listening, Maggie." He tapped his finger on the manila envelope between them. "I said sign it, tonight." Maggie looked at her husband of 5 years. He was wearing a charcoal suit she had never seen before. Italian, probably. The kind that cost more than 3 months of her salary. "Where did you get that suit, Derek?" "That's your question?" He laughed. It was a cold sound. "I'm asking you for a divorce, and you want to talk about my clothes." "I bought you your last suit." Maggie's voice was quiet. "At Goodwill. For your interview at Patterson Law. You said it was the most important day of your life. That was 4 years ago. 3 years and 7 months. Derek's jaw tightened. "You always do this. You always make everything about the past. I'm talking about the future, Maggie. My future." The bell above the diner door chimed. Maggie turned. A woman walked in. Blonde. Perfect. Wearing a white cashmere coat that probably cost more than Maggie's car. She didn't sit down. She walked straight to their booth and slid in next to Derek. "Is this her?" The woman looked at Maggie the way someone looks at a stain on expensive furniture. "The nurse." "Vanessa, give us a minute." Derek's voice changed. Softer. Almost gentle. "We have dinner reservations at 8, DJ." Vanessa checked her phone. "Daddy's waiting." Maggie stared at the woman, then at Derek, then at the space between them, the space where his hand rested on Vanessa's thigh like it belonged there. "How long?" Maggie asked. "Does it matter? How long, Derek?" He sighed. 14 months. Since the Whitmore Christmas Gala. Vanessa's father owns... I know who Preston Whitmore is. Maggie's hands were shaking. He owns half the hotels on the waterfront. He's the reason Patterson Law has been trying to get that contract for 2 years. And now they have it. Derek smiled. It was a smile Maggie had never seen before. "Because of me, because of Vanessa, because I finally made the right choice." "The right choice?" "Yes." Derek leaned forward. "Look at yourself, Maggie. Really look. You work 60 hours a week wiping old people's behinds. You come home smelling like disinfectant and death. When was the last time you wore something that wasn't scrubs?" "I wear scrubs because I'm a nurse, Derek. Because I take care of people. You take care of strangers." He spat the word. "Meanwhile, I've been dying in that apartment waiting for you to come home, waiting for you to notice that I needed more, that I deserved more." Vanessa giggled. "DJ, you're being dramatic." "I'm being honest." Derek pushed the envelope closer to Maggie. "Sign it. The divorce is uncontested. I'm not asking for anything. I'm letting you keep the debt, the credit cards, the student loans, all of it. I'm being generous." "Generous?" Maggie's voice cracked. "I took out those loans to pay for your law school, Derek. I worked night shifts for 3 years so you could study during the day. I donated plasma twice a week so we could make rent. And I'm grateful." Derek didn't sound grateful. "But gratitude doesn't pay for the life I want. You were perfect for who I was. You're not perfect for who I'm becoming." Vanessa looked at her nails. Can we wrap this up? The valet situation at the Metropolitan is a nightmare after 7. Maggie stared at the papers. Her name was already typed on the signature line. Margaret Rose Thornton. Like Derek had known exactly how this would end. What happens if I don't sign? Derek's eyes went flat. Then I drag this out for 2 years. I tell everyone at the hospital about your little breakdown last March. I make sure the nursing board knows about the pills you took. Maggie's blood turned to ice. I had the flu. I took cold medicine. I disclosed everything to my supervisor. That's not what I'll tell them. Derek shrugged. Sign the papers tonight and I disappear quietly. Fight me, and I'll make sure you never work in this city again. The diner was suddenly too bright, too loud. Maggie's hands were trembling as she pulled a pen from her purse, a cheap ballpoint she had stolen from the hospital supply closet. She looked at Derek one last time, searched for the man who had held her when her mother died, the man who had promised her a house with a garden and children and a life that meant something. That man was gone. Maybe he had never existed. Maggie signed her name. The pen scratched against the paper like a final breath. Derek snatched the documents before the ink was dry. Good. Now the apartment. I need you out by Friday. Friday, Derek, that's 2 days from now. It's December. Where am I supposed to go? Not my problem. He was already standing, already helping Vanessa with her coat. The lease is in my name. I'm breaking it. Vanessa's father has a penthouse on the waterfront. We're moving in together. I don't have anywhere to go. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you let yourself become so forgettable. Derek dropped a $20 bill on the table. For her coffee, he told the waitress passing by. Keep the change. $20. 5 years of marriage reduced to a $20 tip. Maggie watched them leave. Derek's hand on Vanessa's back. Vanessa's laugh floating through the cold December air. The door closing with a cheerful chime that felt like mockery. She sat in the booth for 17 minutes. She knew because she counted. She counted the seconds between breaths. She counted the ceiling tiles. She counted anything that would stop her from screaming. Finally, she stood up. The waitress, a tired woman with gray roots showing through red hair, looked at her with something like pity. You okay, honey? I'm fine. Maggie's voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Just fine. She walked out into the December rain. Seattle in December was a special kind of cruelty. The cold wasn't sharp like Chicago cold or bitter like Boston cold. It was wet, penetrating. The kind of cold that seeped into your bones and whispered that you would never be warm again. Maggie walked. She didn't know where she was going. Her apartment. Derek's apartment was 15 blocks north, but she couldn't face it. Couldn't face the empty closet where his clothes used to hang. Couldn't face the bed they had shared for 5 years. Her phone buzzed. A notification from her banking app, overdraft fee applied. $3,500. Maggie laughed. It was not a happy sound. She had $43 in her checking account. Now she had $8. Her phone buzzed again. Another notification, payment declined. Seattle Metro Transit, $2.50. She couldn't even afford the bus. Maggie kept walking. At some point, the rain stopped. At some point, she found herself sitting on a bench near the waterfront, staring at the gray waves crashing against the pier. The Space Needle glowed in the distance like a promise meant for someone else. She thought about her mother. Grace Thornton had died 6 years ago in a hospital bed, not unlike the ones Maggie made every night. Cancer. The slow kind. The kind that gave you time to say goodbye, but took everything else first. Dignity, independence, hope. On her deathbed, Grace had grabbed Maggie's hand with surprising strength. Don't let anyone make you small, baby girl. You come from strong women, stronger than you know. Maggie had never understood what that meant. She was alone now. No parents, no siblings, no husband, no one. The cold was getting worse. Her scrubs were soaked through. Hypothermia would set in within the hour if she didn't find shelter. She thought about the hospital. She could go back to work, claim she was picking up an extra shift, sleep in the break room. But no. Derek's threat hung over her like a guillotine. If she gave him any reason to talk, any reason to spread his lies about the pills about her stability, she would lose everything. A sound escaped her throat. Not a cry, not a scream. Something in between the sound of someone who had run out of tears. "Ma'am." Maggie looked up. A man stood a few feet away. He was old 60s, maybe 70s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses that probably cost more than Maggie's rent. He wore a black overcoat and carried an umbrella, though the rain had stopped. "Ma'am, are you all right?" His voice was gentle, concerned. "You're shivering." "I'm fine." The words came automatically. "Just needed some air." In December, in scrubs. The man didn't move closer, but he didn't leave either. "Forgive me for saying so, but you don't look fine. You look like someone who's had a very difficult day." Maggie almost laughed. "You could say that. My name is Harold Brennan." The man reached into his pocket and produced a business card. "I'm a lawyer. And unless I'm very much mistaken, you're Margaret Rose Thornton." Maggie's blood ran cold. "How do you know my name?" "Because I've been looking for you for 3 weeks." Harold took a careful step forward. "And because your grandmother asked me to find you." "My grandmother?" Maggie shook her head. "My grandmother died before I was born. My mother told me—" "Your mother told you a story," Harold interrupted gently. "A story that Eleanor Kensington asked her to tell. A story that protected you from a very complicated truth." "I don't understand." "Your grandmother didn't die 40 years ago, Miss Thornton." Harold's voice was soft. "She died 72 hours ago, and she left you everything." Maggie stared at him. The words didn't make sense. They were sounds, nothing more. Letters strung together in an impossible order. "Everything." "Everything." Harold opened his briefcase and removed a leather folder thick with documents. "Eleanor Kensington was the founder and sole owner of Kensington Medical Properties. It's the largest healthcare real estate portfolio in North America. Hospitals, nursing homes, rehabilitation centers, medical office buildings in 43 states." "I don't—" Maggie's throat was closing. "I don't understand what you're telling me." "I'm telling you that as of 72 hours ago, you became the sole beneficiary of an estate valued at approximately $1.8 billion. The number hung in the air like a foreign language. "That's impossible." Maggie's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm a night nurse. I have $8 in my bank account. My husband just left me for a woman whose coat costs more than my car." "Yes." Harold's eyes were kind. "Eleanor knew all of that. She's been watching you for a very long time, Miss Thornton. Watching and waiting. Watching me. Why?" Harold handed her a sealed envelope. The paper was heavy, expensive. Maggie's name was written on the front, in elegant handwriting. "Because she needed to know if you were worthy." Harold stepped back. "That letter will explain more. But the short version is this: Eleanor believed that money destroys people who aren't ready for it. She spent the last 30 years testing potential heirs. Her children, her nieces and nephews, her grandchildren. They all failed. Failed how? Cruelty, greed, entitlement." Harold's jaw tightened. Eleanor watched them chase money their entire lives. She watched them marry for status, divorce for convenience, and treat everyone beneath them like furniture. She swore she would never give her empire to someone who would use it as a weapon. Maggie looked at the envelope in her hands. "And she thought I was different. She knew you were different." Harold smiled a small, sad smile. "She watched you donate blood plasma to pay your rent. She watched you take extra shifts so your husband could sleep in. She watched you hold a dying patient's hand for 6 hours because his family couldn't be bothered to come." Tears were streaming down Maggie's face now. She didn't bother to wipe them away. She watched me suffer. Yes. And she did nothing. That was the test, Miss Thornton. Harold's voice was quiet. Anyone can be kind when life is easy. Eleanor needed to know that you would stay kind when life was impossible, that you would remain good when the world gave you every reason to become bitter. Maggie thought about Derek, about the divorce papers, about the $20 tip. What if I had failed? Then the money would have gone to charity. Harold reached into his pocket and produced a small black card. It was metal, not plastic, with no numbers on its face. Just a chip and Maggie's name embossed in silver. But you didn't fail, which means this belongs to you. Maggie took the card. It was heavy in her palm. What is this? A Centurion card. It's linked to your personal trust account. Harold buttoned his coat. There's a car waiting for us at the end of the pier. We need to get you to New York. The board of directors is expecting you. New York? I can't go to New York. I have a shift tomorrow. Maggie stopped. She had nothing. No apartment, no husband, no life. I have nothing. You have $1.8 billion. Harold offered his arm. And a choice to make. Maggie looked at the black card, then at Harold, then at the gray Seattle skyline, where somewhere in some penthouse, Derek was probably opening a bottle of champagne with Vanessa. He had called her forgettable. He had no idea. What kind of choice? Maggie asked. Harold smiled. There was something in that smile, something sharp and satisfied, like a chess player watching his opponent walk into a trap. The kind that will determine whether Derek Holloway spends the rest of his life regretting what he did tonight. Harold gestured toward the waiting car. Shall we? Maggie stood up. Her scrubs were still wet. Her hands were still shaking. Her heart was still broken. But somewhere deep inside her chest, beneath the grief and the exhaustion and the crushing weight of betrayal, something new was stirring. Something that felt like power. Let's go, Maggie said. She didn't look back. The black car cut through Seattle's rain-slicked streets like a knife through silk. Maggie sat in the back seat, still wearing her wet scrubs, clutching the envelope Harold had given her. She hadn't opened it yet. She was afraid that if she did, the words inside would dissolve like a dream. You're shivering, Harold said from the seat across from her. There's a cashmere blanket in the compartment beside you. Maggie found the blanket. It was softer than anything she had ever touched. She wrapped it around her shoulders and felt like a fraud. This doesn't feel real. It will. Harold pulled out a tablet and began typing. By this time tomorrow, you'll wish it wasn't. What does that mean? It means that $1.8 billion comes with enemies, Miss Thornton. Harold didn't look up. People who wanted your grandmother's money. People who thought they deserved it. People who will do anything to take it from you. Who? Her children, for starters. Harold's voice was flat. Eleanor had 3 sons. She cut them all out of the will 15 years ago. They've been contesting her estate in court ever since, hoping she would die before the legal battles were resolved. Wait. Maggie leaned forward. I have uncles. You have vultures. Harold finally met her eyes. Richard Thomas and William Kensington. They've spent their entire lives waiting for their mother to die so they could divide her empire. When they find out a granddaughter they've never met is getting everything, they will come for you. Come for me how? Lawyers, private investigators, media leaks. Harold counted on his fingers. They'll try to prove you're mentally unstable. They'll dig up every mistake you've ever made. They'll paint you as a gold digger who manipulated a dying old woman. Maggie thought about Derek's threat, the pills, the nursing board. They'll find things, she whispered. My husband, my ex-husband, he said he would tell people I had a breakdown. He said, I know what he said. Harold's voice was calm. I was listening. Maggie's blood froze. What? Your grandmother had surveillance on you, Miss Thornton. Audio, video, financial monitoring. She's been watching your marriage disintegrate for the past 2 years. Harold reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I have transcripts of every conversation Derek Holloway has had with Vanessa Whitmore since their affair began. I have records of every lie he's told his employers about his credentials. I have evidence that he falsified his billable hours at Patterson Law for the past 18 months. You've been spying on my husband. Your grandmother was protecting her investment. Harold handed her the folder. You are not a helpless nurse anymore, Miss Thornton. You are the sole heir to one of the largest private fortunes in America, and your grandmother made sure you would have weapons. Maggie opened the folder. Inside were photographs. Derek and Vanessa at a restaurant. Derek and Vanessa at a hotel. Derek and Vanessa in a car, his hand on her thigh, her lips on his neck. 14 months of betrayal documented in high resolution. Something shifted inside Maggie's chest. The grief was still there, but it was making room for something else now. Something colder, harder. Why are you showing me this? Because you need to understand what kind of man you married. Harold leaned back. And because you need to decide what kind of woman you want to become. The car stopped. Maggie looked out the window. They were at a private airfield. A sleek white jet waited on the tarmac, its engines already humming. That's your plane, Harold said. Eleanor bought it 8 years ago. She named it the Phoenix. I always thought that was a bit dramatic, but now I understand why. I can't get on that plane. Maggie's voice was rising. I have a job. I have patience. Mrs. Okonkwo is expecting me tomorrow morning. She doesn't have anyone else. Mrs. Okonkwo will be transferred to a private care facility. Harold opened the car door. All expenses paid, for the rest of her life. Maggie stared at him. You can't just... You can. Harold stepped out of the car and offered his hand. That's what $1.8 billion means, Miss Thornton. You can do anything. The only question is whether you'll use that power to help people or destroy them. Maggie looked at the plane, then at the folder full of photographs, then at the black card still clutched in her shaking hand. She thought about Derek. She thought about Vanessa. She thought about the $20 tip. Both, Maggie said quietly. I want to do both. Harold smiled. It was a sharp smile full of teeth. Then welcome to the family. The flight to New York took 5 hours. Maggie spent the first hour reading her grandmother's letter. Then she read it again. Then a third time because the words kept blurring behind her tears. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably very confused. I don't blame you. I've spent 30 years watching you from a distance, and I know how strange that must seem. Your mother hated me. She had every right to. I was not a good mother to Grace. I was too focused on building my empire, too convinced that money was the answer to everything. By the time I realized my mistake, Grace had already run away, already married your father, already decided that her children would never know the poison of the Kensington name. I respected her choice. I stayed away. But I never stopped watching. I watched you grow up in foster homes after Grace died. I watched you put yourself through nursing school while working 2 jobs. I watched you marry a man who was never worthy of you, and I watched you love him anyway, because that's who you are. You give everything to people who give nothing back. That's why I chose you, Margaret. Not because you're perfect, but because you're good, truly good. The kind of good that doesn't break even when the world tries to crush it. My sons are not good. They are greedy and cruel and everything I was afraid they would become. I will not give them my life's work. I will not watch them destroy everything I built. But you, my darling granddaughter, you I trust. Use this money wisely. Help the people who helped you. And when the time comes, make the people who hurt you understand exactly what they lost. With all my love. Eleanor. Maggie folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. She had so many questions. Why hadn't Eleanor reached out sooner? Why had she let Maggie struggle for so long? Why had she watched instead of helped? But the answers didn't matter anymore. Eleanor was dead. The money was real. And Derek Holloway was about to discover the true cost of his cruelty. Harold appeared at her elbow with a cup of tea. "We'll land in 2 hours. I've arranged for a stylist to meet us at the Four Seasons. The board meeting is tomorrow at 9. Board meeting. Kensington Medical Properties has 12 board members. Harold sat down across from her. They've been running the company since Eleanor's health declined 3 years ago. They're expecting to continue running it after her death. They don't know about you yet." "What do you mean they don't know?" "Eleanor kept you secret." Harold's voice was careful. She didn't trust the board. She believed several of them were working with her sons to undermine her control. She wanted you to have the element of surprise. Maggie's head was spinning. "So, tomorrow I'm going to walk into a room full of strangers and tell them I own their company." "Essentially, yes." "I don't know anything about running a company, Harold. I'm a nurse. I change bedpans and check blood pressure and hold people's hands when they're dying. Those are exactly the skills you'll need." Harold leaned forward. "Eleanor didn't build her empire on spreadsheets and stock prices. She built it on understanding people, on knowing what they needed before they knew it themselves. You've spent your entire career doing the same thing." "That's different." "Is it?" Harold raised an eyebrow. "Tell me about Mrs. Okonkwo." Maggie blinked. "What about her?" "You mentioned her earlier. You said she was expecting you tomorrow. Tell me about her." "She's 83 years old. She has congestive heart failure and early-stage dementia. Her children live in California and never visit. She's afraid of dying alone." "And what do you do for her?" Maggie shrugged. "I talk to her. I listen to her stories about her late husband. I bring her extra pudding from the cafeteria because she likes chocolate." "You see her," Harold said quietly. "That's what you do. You see people who are invisible to everyone else. You understand what they need, and you find a way to give it to them. That's not business. That's the only business that matters." Harold stood up. Eleanor saw thousands of people over her lifetime. Investors, partners, employees, competitors. She said she could always tell who would succeed and who would fail within the first 5 minutes. "Do you know how?" Maggie shook her head. She asked them one question. "What would you do if no one was watching?" Harold walked toward the front of the plane. "The ones who talked about making money failed. The ones who talked about helping people succeeded. Eleanor believed that profit follows purpose, not the other way around." "And you think I have purpose?" Harold paused at the door. "I think you spent 5 years sacrificing everything for a man who didn't deserve you. I think you showed up for work every single day, even when your own life was falling apart. I think you're the kind of person who would give her last dollar to a stranger if they needed it more. That's not purpose, that's stupidity." "No, Miss Thornton." Harold smiled. "That's power. You just don't know how to use it yet." The Four Seasons in New York was not a hotel. It was a temple to wealth, a cathedral of marble and gold, where the air itself seemed to cost money. Maggie walked through the lobby in her borrowed cashmere blanket, her wet scrubs leaving faint footprints on the polished floor. Every head turned to stare. A woman in a red dress whispered something to her companion. A man in a tailored suit looked at Maggie like she was a stain that needed to be cleaned. A bellhop hesitated, clearly unsure whether to help her or call security. Harold walked beside her, unbothered. "The penthouse suite is reserved in your name," he said. "The stylist will arrive in 20 minutes. I suggest you shower first." "People are staring." "Let them." Harold pressed the elevator button. "In 24 hours, half of them will be begging for a meeting with you. The other half will be scrambling to find out who you are." The elevator doors opened. The operator inside looked at Maggie's scrubs with barely concealed disgust. "Penthouse," Harold said calmly. "Sir, I'm not sure." "This is Margaret Kensington." Harold's voice turned to ice. "She owns this hotel. Would you like to explain to her why you're hesitating?" The operator's face went white. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Right away, ma'am." The elevator rose. Maggie turned to Harold. "I own this hotel." "The Four Seasons is a franchise. Your grandmother owned the building. Harold checked his phone. She owned quite a few buildings, actually. 37 in Manhattan alone. We'll go over the full portfolio tomorrow. The penthouse was larger than any apartment Maggie had ever lived in. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Central Park that looked like a painting. Fresh flowers filled crystal vases on every surface. A grand piano sat in the corner, polished to a mirror shine. Maggie walked to the window and pressed her hand against the cold glass. Somewhere out there, Derek was celebrating his freedom. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was planning her future as Mrs. Derek Holloway. Somewhere out there, the life Maggie had built was crumbling into dust. And here she stood in a penthouse that cost more per night than she earned in a year wearing scrubs that still smelled like hospital disinfectant. "It doesn't feel real," she said again. Harold appeared beside her. "It will. Soon enough, it will feel like the only thing that's real. What happens now? Now you sleep. Tomorrow you fight." Harold handed her a thick binder. "This contains everything you need to know about the board members. Their names, their histories, their weaknesses. Study it tonight. And if I'm not ready, then fake it." Harold walked toward the door. "Your grandmother spent 60 years pretending she knew what she was doing. By the time anyone realized she was making it up as she went, she owned half the healthcare real estate in America. She faked it. Everyone does, Miss Thornton." Harold paused at the threshold. "The only difference between success and failure is whether you stop pretending before you figure it out." He closed the door behind him. Maggie stood alone in the penthouse, surrounded by luxury she didn't deserve, holding a binder full of secrets about people she'd never met. Her phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "Left some of your stuff in a box outside the apartment. Don't contact me again." Maggie read the message 3 times. Then she deleted it. Then she opened the binder and began to read. The stylist arrived at 6 a.m. Her name was Ingrid, and she looked at Maggie the way a sculptor looks at raw marble. "We have 3 hours," Ingrid announced. "That is not enough time, but we will manage." "I don't need anything fancy," Maggie said. "Just something professional." Ingrid laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "Darling, you are about to walk into a boardroom full of men who have spent their entire careers underestimating women. Professional will not be enough. You need to look like someone who could buy and sell them without breaking a sweat." "I don't feel like that person." "Feelings are irrelevant." Ingrid snapped her fingers, and 2 assistants appeared with racks of clothing. "The goal is not to feel powerful. The goal is to make them feel small." For 3 hours, Maggie was transformed. Her hair, still damp from the rain, was cut into a sharp, elegant style that made her cheekbones look like weapons. Her nails, bitten and broken from years of hospital work, were manicured into perfect ovals. Her skin, pale from exhaustion, was given a subtle glow that made her look like she had just returned from a spa rather than a night of crying. And the clothes. Ingrid chose a suit of deep navy blue tailored so precisely that Maggie felt like she had been poured into it. The heels were 4 inches high, red-soled, and clicked on the marble floor like a heartbeat. "Look!" Ingrid commanded, spinning Maggie toward the mirror. Maggie looked. A stranger stared back. This woman was not a nurse. This woman was not a divorcee. This woman was not someone who could be dismissed with a $20 tip. This woman was dangerous. "Who is she?" Maggie whispered. "She is whoever you need her to be." Ingrid stepped back, satisfied with her work. "Now go. Make them regret ever doubting you." The boardroom was on the 47th floor of a glass tower that bore the Kensington name. Maggie stood outside the door, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged animal. Harold stood beside her, calm and unreadable. "Ready?" "No." "Good." Harold straightened his tie. "Confidence is overrated. What matters is commitment. Are you committed, Miss Thornton?" Maggie thought about Derek. She thought about Vanessa. She thought about every time someone had looked at her and seen nothing. "Yes." "Then let's begin." The door opened. 12 faces turned to look at her. They were all men except one, a silver-haired woman in her 60s, who sat at the far end of the table with an expression of bored contempt. The men ranged in age from 40 to 70, all wearing identical looks of polished skepticism. At the head of the table sat Tobias Crane, the interim CEO. He was heavy-set, red-faced, and looked at Maggie like she was something that had crawled in from the street. "Mr. Brennan," Tobias said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I wasn't aware we were expecting visitors." "This isn't a visitor, Mr. Crane." Harold gestured for Maggie to enter. "This is Margaret Kensington, Eleanor's granddaughter, and as of 3 days ago, the sole owner of everything in this room." Silence. The kind of silence that precedes an explosion. "That's impossible," Tobias sputtered. "Eleanor's will leaves everything to a charitable foundation. The lawyers confirmed what Eleanor wanted them to confirm." Harold placed a thick folder on the table. "The real will has been sealed for 15 years, waiting for the right conditions. Those conditions were met when Miss Thornton's divorce was finalized 72 hours ago." "Divorce?" The silver-haired woman leaned forward. "What does a divorce have to do with Eleanor's estate?" "Eleanor believed that Miss Thornton's husband was a threat." Harold's voice was calm. "A fortune hunter who would attempt to seize control of the company if given access. She built a failsafe into her will. If Miss Thornton divorced him before Eleanor's death, she would inherit immediately. If she stayed married, the inheritance would be delayed until she was 50. "This is ridiculous," Tobias snapped. "I've run this company for 3 years. I've increased revenue by 12%. I've expanded into 6 new markets. And now you're telling me some nurse from Seattle is going to walk in and—" "Increased revenue by 12%, Maggie interrupted. Everyone turned to look at her. It was the first time she had spoken. Her voice was quiet but steady. "You increased revenue by 12%, Maggie continued. "But you did it by cutting staff at 37 facilities, reducing maintenance budgets by 20%, and delaying equipment upgrades at 16 hospitals. You saved money in the short term, but you created liabilities that will cost this company 3 times as much in the next 5 years." Tobias's face went purple. "How do you—" "I'm a nurse, Mr. Crane." Maggie walked slowly around the table. "I've worked in the facilities you cut. I've seen the equipment you refused to replace. I've watched patients suffer because you cared more about quarterly reports than quality of care. That's a gross oversimplification. Page 47 of the Q3 risk assessment." Maggie stopped behind Tobias's chair. 3 facilities flagged for potential malpractice suits due to understaffing. Page 62, 2 hospitals at risk of losing their accreditation due to deferred maintenance. Page 89, a whistleblower complaint about billing fraud that was buried to avoid bad press. The room was silent. "I read the binder," Maggie said quietly. "I read all 400 pages, and I have questions." She looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. "My grandmother built this company to help people. Somewhere along the way, it became about helping yourselves instead. That ends today." Tobias stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "You can't come in here and— I can do whatever I want." Maggie's voice was ice. "I own 51% of this company. I am the majority shareholder. And unless you want me to read the rest of what's in that binder, the insider trading, the expense account fraud, the inappropriate relationships with vendors, I suggest you sit down and listen." Tobias sat. "Good." Maggie took her place at the head of the table. "Now, let's talk about the future." The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the end, 3 board members had resigned. 2 had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and Tobias Crane had been stripped of his interim CEO title and reassigned to a compliance role that was essentially a demotion disguised as a lateral move. The silver-haired woman, whose name was Dorothy Nash, was the only one smiling when it was over. "Well," Dorothy said, rising from her chair, "that was the most entertaining board meeting I've attended in 30 years. I'm glad you enjoyed it." "I didn't enjoy it." Dorothy walked toward Maggie. "I've been waiting for it. Eleanor told me you would come. She said you would clean house. I just didn't expect you to do it quite so thoroughly. You knew about me. I was Eleanor's best friend for 40 years. Dorothy's eyes softened. I was also the only board member she trusted. She asked me to stay, to watch over things until you arrived. Why didn't you tell me? Because Eleanor wanted you to prove yourself first. Dorothy placed a hand on Maggie's shoulder. You did. Magnificently. Maggie felt something crack inside her chest. The armor she had been wearing all morning suddenly felt too heavy. I don't know what I'm doing, she admitted. Neither did Eleanor at first. Dorothy smiled. But she figured it out, and so will you. Harold appeared in the doorway. Miss Kensington, there's something you need to see. Maggie followed him to a private office down the hall. Inside, a wall of television screens showed news coverage from around the world. One screen was tuned to a Seattle news station. The headline read, Whitmore Hospitality Group faces bankruptcy. What is this? Maggie asked. Preston Whitmore overextended himself on a development project called The Obsidian. Harold pointed at the screen. He's been looking for investors for months, but no one will touch it. The project is hemorrhaging money. What does that have to do with me? Whitmore's daughter is engaged to your ex-husband. Harold's voice was careful. Derek has been put in charge of finding an investor. If he fails, Preston will fire him. And if Preston fires him, the prenuptial agreement Vanessa forced him to sign becomes void. Derek signed a prenup. A brutal one. Harold handed her a document. If Derek loses his position at Whitmore before the wedding, he gets nothing. No alimony, no assets, no severance. Vanessa's lawyers made sure of it. Maggie looked at the document, then at the television. They're desperate. They're drowning. Harold leaned against the desk. And they're about to discover that the only life raft in the water belongs to you. Maggie stared at the screen. Derek's face appeared in a news clip looking polished and confident as he promised investors that the Obsidian would be the crown jewel of Seattle's waterfront. He had no idea. He had no idea that his ex-wife was watching. He had no idea that she held the power to save him or destroy him. He had no idea that the woman he had thrown away was about to become the most important person in his life. What do you want to do? Harold asked. Maggie watched Derek smile for the cameras. She thought about the $20 tip. She thought about the box of her belongings left outside their apartment. She thought about 5 years of sacrifice, of love, of hope, all discarded like garbage. I want him to succeed, Maggie said quietly. I want him to climb all the way to the top. I want him to think he's won. And then, Maggie turned away from the screen. And then, I want to be standing there when the ladder breaks. 8 months. 8 months of 18-hour days. 8 months of learning the language of power, leverage liquidity, hostile acquisition. 8 months of transforming from a nurse who changed bedpans into a woman who changed boardrooms. Maggie Kensington stood at the window of her corner office, watching the New York skyline blur in the rain. Her reflection stared back at her sharp cheekbones, sharper suit eyes that had learned to hide everything. Her phone buzzed. It's time, Harold said. The Whitmore situation has reached critical mass. How bad? Preston missed his second payment on the Obsidian loan yesterday. The banks are circling. He has maybe 6 weeks before they foreclose. Maggie turned away from the window. And Derek? Desperate. He's contacted 47 investment firms in the past 2 months. All of them said no. Harold paused. He's running out of options. Good. Maggie picked up her coat. Let's give him one more. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Maggie had spent 8 months building a shell company called Phoenix Capital. On paper, it had no connection to Kensington Medical Properties, no connection to her. Phoenix Capital had expressed interest in funding the Obsidian project. Derek had been trying to arrange a meeting for 3 weeks. Today, he would finally get one. The Seattle Emerald Gala is tomorrow night, Harold said as they walked toward the elevator. Every major player in Pacific Northwest real estate will be there. Preston has secured a private meeting room for Derek to pitch Phoenix Capital's CEO. And Derek has no idea who that CEO is. None. Harold smiled. He's been told the investor prefers anonymity. He's been told she'll be wearing a mask. I may have let that detail slip. Harold pressed the elevator button. I wanted him to know he was meeting a woman. I wanted him to spend the whole flight wondering what kind of woman could make a $100 million decision. Maggie stepped into the elevator. You're enjoying this. I'm enjoying watching justice being served. Harold followed her inside. There's a difference. The flight to Seattle was 6 hours of preparation. Maggie reviewed the Obsidian project files one more time. She memorized every flaw, every overrun, every lie Derek had told investors. She practiced her entrance, her posture the exact moment she would remove her mask. Dorothy Nash had insisted on coming. I wouldn't miss this for anything, Dorothy said, sipping champagne in the seat across from Maggie. I've watched that boy's career from a distance. The way he charmed Eleanor's granddaughter. The way he used her and discarded her. Men like Derek always think they're the smartest person in the room. And tonight he's going to learn that he's not even the smartest person in his own marriage. Dorothy smiled. Or his former marriage, I should say. Maggie touched the mask that lay beside her. It was Venetian black and gold covering everything above the lips. What if I can't do it? Do what? Face him. Maggie's voice dropped. What if I see him and I just fall apart? Dorothy reached across and took Maggie's hand. Do you remember what Eleanor wrote in her letter? She said you stayed good even when the world tried to crush you. That doesn't mean you don't feel pain. It means you don't let the pain win. I loved him, Dorothy. For 5 years I loved him with everything I had. I know. Dorothy squeezed her hand. That's what makes this so important. You're not just confronting Derek tonight. You're confronting the woman who let herself be treated like nothing. You're telling her that she deserved better. And you're proving that she finally knows it. Maggie closed her eyes. When she opened them, the weakness was gone. I'm ready. The Emerald Gala was Seattle's most exclusive event. Held at the Museum of Glass, it attracted the city's wealthiest residents. Tech billionaires, real estate moguls, politicians, and the old money families who had built their fortunes when Seattle was still a logging town. Maggie arrived at 8:47 p.m. She wore a gown of midnight blue that moved like water when she walked. The mask covered her face. Diamonds hung from her ears, real ones now, not the cubic zirconia she had worn at her wedding. 4 security guards flanked her. The crowd parted. Everyone's staring, Maggie murmured to Harold. Let them. Harold guided her toward the private meeting room. Mystery is power. The less they know, the more they'll imagine. They passed through the main hall. Maggie caught fragments of conversation. Phoenix Capital, never heard of them. Must be tech money, probably some Silicon Valley. Heard their CEO is younger than 30. The Whitmore boy is meeting with her tonight. The Whitmore boy. Maggie felt her stomach tighten. Derek was here. Somewhere in this building, the man who had destroyed her life was preparing to beg for her money. She almost smiled. The private meeting room was on the 2nd floor. Harold opened the door. Inside, a small table had been set with champagne and documents. 2 chairs faced each other across the polished surface. Derek will arrive in 15 minutes, Harold said. He's currently downstairs with Preston and Vanessa rehearsing his pitch one last time. Vanessa is here? Of course. She wants to meet the mysterious investor who might save her family's fortune. Harold's voice was dry. I'm sure she'll be disappointed when she realizes the investor is the woman she called the dishwasher. Maggie sat down. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. Send him up in 10 minutes. I want him to wait. Understood. Harold left. Maggie was alone. She thought about the last time she had been alone with Derek. The diner. The divorce papers. The $20 tip. She thought about the box of her belongings left outside their apartment. She thought about 5 years of love reduced to a text message. Don't contact me again. The door opened. Maggie didn't turn around. Ms. Phoenix. Derek's voice was smooth, professional. The voice he used when he wanted something. I'm Derek Holloway representing Whitmore Hospitality Group. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Maggie stayed silent. She heard Derek's footsteps, heard him pull out the chair across from her, heard him sit down and clear his throat nervously. I have to say this is unconventional, Derek continued. Most investors want to meet face-to-face without the masks. But I respect the desire for privacy. In my experience, the best deals happen when both parties feel comfortable. Silence. Well, Derek laughed awkwardly. Shall I begin the presentation? I have a full analysis of the Obsidian project, projected returns, risk mitigation strategies, everything you need to make an informed decision. Maggie finally spoke. I don't need a presentation, Derek. He froze. She could feel his confusion, the way he was trying to place her voice, the way something in his memory was screaming that he knew her, that he had heard those words before. I'm sorry, Derek said slowly. Have we met? We were married for 5 years. The room went dead. Maggie turned. She reached up and pulled the ribbon of her mask. The silk fell away like a curtain at the end of a play. Derek's face went white, not pale. White, the color of bone, the color of terror. Maggie. Hello, Derek. Maggie smiled. It was not a warm smile. I believe you wanted to discuss a business proposition. Derek stood up so fast his chair crashed to the floor. This is impossible. You're a nurse. You work at you don't have. How are you? Sit down, Derek. No. Derek backed toward the door. No, this is a trick. This is some kind of sick joke. Who put you up to this? Was it your brother? Do you even have a brother? I have 3 uncles I've never met. I have a grandmother who died 3 days after you divorced me. And I have $1.8 billion that says you're going to sit down and listen. Derek stopped moving. $1.8 billion. My grandmother was Eleanor Kensington. Maggie crossed her legs. She founded Kensington Medical Properties. She owned hospitals and nursing homes in 43 states. She watched me for 30 years waiting to see if I was worthy of inheriting her empire. That's not possible. She watched our marriage, Derek. She had surveillance on us for 2 years. She knew about Vanessa before I did. Derek's face was cycling through emotions, shock, denial, fear, and finally something that looked almost like hope. Maggie. His voice changed. Softer now. The voice he used when he wanted something. Maggie, listen to me. If I had known... If you had known I was rich, you wouldn't have divorced me. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. Maggie stood up. She was taller than him in her heels. You told me I didn't fit your future. You told me I smelled like stale coffee and desperation. You said I was a stepping stone, a placeholder. I was wrong. No. Maggie stepped closer. You were honest. For the first time in our entire marriage, you told me exactly who you were. A man who measures people by what they can give him. A man who throws away loyalty like garbage. Maggie, please. Do you remember the tip you left at the diner? Derek blinked. What? The day you divorced me. You left $20 on the table for my coffee. You told the waitress to keep the change. Maggie reached into her clutch and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. I kept the receipt. She held it up. $6.47. That's what 5 years of marriage was worth to you. $6.47. Derek stared at the receipt. Something in his face crumbled. I didn't know, he whispered. I didn't know you were... That's the point, Derek. Maggie tucked the receipt back into her clutch. You should have loved me when I was nothing. You should have stayed when things were hard. But you didn't. You ran to the first rich woman who would have you. I made a mistake. You made a choice. Maggie walked past him toward the door. And now I'm making mine. Wait. Derek grabbed her arm. Maggie, wait. The Obsidian project, we need that investment. Preston will fire me if I don't close this deal. Vanessa will leave me. I'll lose everything. Maggie looked at his hand on her arm. She remembered all the times those hands had held her, comforted her, made her feel safe. She remembered the day those hands had pushed divorce papers across a diner table. Let go of me, Derek. Please. His voice cracked. I'm begging you. I know I don't deserve it. I know I hurt you. But please just give me a chance. I'll do anything. Maggie pulled her arm free. You want to know the difference between us, Derek? When I had nothing, I gave you everything. When you had nothing, you ran away. She opened the door. The answer is no. Derek lunged forward. Maggie. Security. 2 guards appeared instantly. Please escort Mr. Holloway back to the main event, Maggie said calmly. He and I are finished here. You can't do this, Derek shouted as the guards took his arms. Maggie, you can't just... I'll tell everyone. I'll tell them who you are. Maggie paused. She turned back. Tell them whatever you want, Derek. Tell them I'm your ex-wife. Tell them I was a nurse. Tell them I used to serve you breakfast in bed and rub your feet after long days. She smiled. And then tell them I own the building they're standing in. Tell them I hold the mortgage on Whitmore's entire company. Tell them I could destroy everything Preston has built with a single phone call. Derek's face went gray. You wouldn't. I haven't decided yet. Maggie stepped into the hallway. But watching you squirm while I make up my mind, that's worth every penny of the fortune you threw away. The guards dragged Derek toward the stairs. His shouts echoed through the corridor. Maggie, Maggie, please! You have to listen to me! She didn't listen. She walked in the opposite direction toward the private elevator that would take her to the rooftop observation deck. Harold was waiting by the elevator doors. That was impressive. I feel sick. That's normal. Harold pressed the elevator button. Revenge always feels worse than you expect. The satisfaction comes later. Does it? Sometimes. Harold's voice was gentle. Sometimes it never comes at all. The elevator arrived. They stepped inside. What happens now? Maggie asked. That depends on what you want. Harold pressed the button for the roof. You can let Whitmore fail. The Obsidian project will collapse. Preston will go bankrupt. Derek will lose his job, his fiancée, and everything he thought he had gained. And nothing. Derek Holloway will become a cautionary tale, a man who traded love for ambition and lost both. Maggie stared at the elevator buttons. That's not enough. Harold raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? He'll blame me. He'll spend the rest of his life telling himself that I ruined him out of spite, that he would have succeeded if I hadn't interfered. Maggie shook her head. I don't want him to hate me. I want him to hate himself. That's a different kind of revenge. It's the only kind that matters. The elevator doors opened. The rooftop was empty except for Dorothy, who stood near the railing with a glass of champagne. I saw him being escorted out, Dorothy said. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He did. Maggie joined her at the railing. His own. Below them, the gala continued. Through the glass ceiling of the museum, they could see the crowd moving and mingling, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded above them. Maggie spotted Derek. He was standing near the bar talking frantically to Preston and Vanessa. Even from this distance, she could see Preston's face reddening. Could see Vanessa's expression shifting from confusion to fury. Vanessa doesn't believe him, Dorothy observed. She thinks he's making excuses for failing to close the deal. He is making excuses. True. Dorothy sipped her champagne. But these excuses happen to be accurate. That must be frustrating for him. Maggie watched as Vanessa turned her back on Derek. Watched as Preston jabbed a finger into Derek's chest. Watched as Derek's carefully constructed world began to crumble. It's not enough, Maggie said again. Then what is? Maggie thought about her grandmother's letter. Help the people who helped you. And when the time comes, make the people who hurt you understand exactly what they lost. I don't want to just destroy him, Maggie said slowly. I want to build something. Something so beautiful and so successful that every time he sees it, he'll remember what he threw away. Harold appeared at her elbow. That would take years. The Obsidian project site is prime waterfront real estate. If Whitmore fails, it goes back to the bank. You could acquire it. And build what? Whatever you want. Harold handed her a tablet showing architectural renderings. Your grandmother was planning a medical complex on that site before Preston outbid her 3 years ago. A state-of-the-art facility with affordable housing for healthcare workers. Maggie looked at the renderings. She thought about Mrs. Okonkwo, about the nurses who worked double shifts just to afford rent, about the patients who died alone because their families couldn't take time off work to visit. She wanted to help people. She always did. Harold's voice was soft. She just forgot it for a while. The money made her lose her way. But at the end she remembered. Maggie handed back the tablet. Buy the debt. All of it. Whitmore's loans, the Obsidian project, everything. That will cost approximately $200 million. Then spend $200 million. Maggie turned away from the railing. And when Preston defaults, I want to be the one holding the foreclosure papers. What about Derek? Maggie thought about her ex-husband standing below them, watching his future dissolve. Derek made his choice. He chose Vanessa. He chose Preston. He chose to bet his future on people who would throw him away the moment he stopped being useful. She started walking toward the elevator. Let him live with that choice. Let him watch me succeed while he fails. Let him spend the rest of his life knowing that the woman he called forgettable became the most powerful person in Seattle. Harold smiled. And what if he comes begging for forgiveness? Maggie paused at the elevator doors. She thought about the diner, the divorce papers, the $20 tip. She thought about the woman she used to be, the woman who would have taken him back, who would have forgiven him, who would have believed his apologies and given him another chance. That woman was dead. In her place stood someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned that forgiveness was a gift, not an obligation. Then I'll tell him what he told me, Maggie said quietly. That I need someone who fits my future. And he doesn't anymore. The elevator doors closed. Below, Derek Holloway stood in the ruins of his ambition, watching the woman he had discarded rise like a phoenix above the city he thought belonged to him. He didn't know it yet. But the ladder he had been climbing his entire life now belonged to her, and she was about to kick it out from under him. 3 weeks after the gala, Preston Whitmore's empire began to die. It started with a phone call. Maggie was in her New York office when Harold walked in with his tablet. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held something that looked almost like satisfaction. Preston missed his third payment this morning. Maggie didn't look up from her documents. And the bank has initiated foreclosure proceedings on the Obsidian project. They've given him 30 days to cure the default or surrender the property. He won't cure it. He doesn't have the money. No. Harold sat down across from her. But he's been making calls, desperate calls. He's contacted every major investor on the West Coast. He's even reached out to foreign capital Chinese investment groups, Saudi sovereign wealth funds. All of them said no. Because we told them to say no? Because we own significant stakes in their American operations. Harold smiled. Amazing how cooperative people become when you hold their mortgages. Maggie finally looked up. What about Derek? Fired. 3 days after the gala. Preston blamed him for the Phoenix Capitol failure. Harold pulled up a news article on his tablet. Vanessa filed for annulment the same day, cited irreconcilable differences and fraud. Fraud. Apparently, Derek exaggerated his credentials when they first met. He told Vanessa he was a senior partner at Patterson Law. He was actually a junior associate on probation. Harold shook his head. She didn't bother to verify until after the gala. Maggie thought about the man she had married, the man who had promised her the world, the man who had lied to everyone, including himself. Where is he now? We're not sure. He was evicted from the penthouse last week. His credit cards have been canceled. His bank accounts are empty. Harold paused. He's disappeared. Something cold settled in Maggie's chest. Find him. Harold raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I'm not done yet. It took 4 days to track Derek down. He was living in a motel near the airport. The kind of place that charged by the hour and didn't ask questions. The kind of place Maggie had almost ended up after he divorced her. She went alone. Harold had argued against it. Dorothy had begged her to reconsider. But Maggie needed to see this, needed to look Derek in the eyes one more time. The motel lobby smelled like cigarettes and regret. Room 147, the clerk said without looking up from his phone. End of the hall. Maggie walked down the corridor. Her heels clicked against the stained carpet. The sound felt wrong in this place, too clean, too expensive. Too much like the woman she had become instead of the woman she used to be. She stopped outside room 147. Her hand hovered over the door. What was she doing here? What did she hope to accomplish? Derek was already destroyed. His career was over. His reputation was in ruins. He had lost everything he had schemed to gain. But it wasn't enough. It still wasn't enough. Maggie knocked. Silence. She knocked again. Go away. Derek's voice was muffled, broken. I already told you I don't have the money. It's Maggie. More silence. Then footsteps. Then the click of a lock. The door opened. Derek looked like a corpse. His hair was unwashed. His suit, the same charcoal suit he had worn to the diner, was wrinkled and stained. His eyes were bloodshot hollow, empty of everything except exhaustion. Come to gloat. No. Then why are you here? Maggie didn't answer. She walked past him into the room. It was worse than she had imagined. Empty takeout containers covered every surface. Clothes were scattered across the floor. The television was on muted, showing a news report about the Whitmore collapse. Nice place, Maggie said quietly. It's what I can afford. Derek closed the door. Turns out nobody wants to hire the man who cost Preston Whitmore $200 million. You didn't cost him anything. He made bad investments. He overextended himself. He would have failed with or without you. But you made sure I got the blame. Derek sat down on the edge of the bed. His shoulders were slumped, defeated. You made sure everyone knew that Derek Holloway was the one who failed to close the deal. I didn't make sure of anything. I just said no. You could have said yes. I could have. Maggie remained standing. But why would I save a man who threw me away? Derek laughed. It was a horrible sound, empty and bitter and full of self-loathing. I deserve this. I know I deserve this. He looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. I just don't understand why you had to watch. Because I needed to see it. See what? Maggie stepped closer. I needed to see the man who told me I wasn't good enough. I needed to see him sitting in a motel room with nothing. I needed to know that everything he did to get ahead, every lie, every betrayal, every cruel word, led him right here. And now you've seen it. Derek's voice cracked. Are you satisfied? Maggie looked at him. She waited for the satisfaction, waited for the rush of triumph, waited for the moment when all the pain and humiliation would transform into something like joy. It didn't come. All she felt was tired. No, she admitted. I'm not satisfied. Then what do you want from me? I don't know. Maggie sat down in the only chair. I thought I wanted revenge. I thought I wanted to watch you suffer the way you made me suffer. But now that I'm here, I just feel empty. Derek stared at her. Something shifted in his eyes, surprise maybe, or confusion. You feel empty. I've spent 8 months planning this. 8 months learning how to be powerful. 8 months building my grandmother's company into something even bigger than she imagined. Maggie shook her head. And the whole time I kept thinking about this moment. About sitting across from you and watching you realize what you lost. And it doesn't matter. Maggie's voice dropped. You don't matter. That's what I finally understand. You never mattered as much as I thought you did. Derek flinched like she had slapped him. I loved you, Maggie. No. Maggie shook her head. You loved what I could give you. My time, my energy, my sacrifice. You loved having someone who made your life easier. But you never loved me. That's not true. Then why did you leave? Derek opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Because I was scared. Scared of what? Of being nothing. His voice was barely a whisper. My whole life people told me I would never amount to anything. My father said I was worthless. My teachers said I was average. Everyone I ever met looked at me like I was invisible. I never looked at you that way. I know. Derek's eyes filled with tears. That's why I stayed as long as I did. Because when you looked at me, I felt like I was somebody, like I mattered. Then why wasn't that enough? Because I wanted more. The tears spilled down his cheeks. I wanted everyone to look at me the way you did. I wanted the whole world to see what you saw. And Vanessa, she promised me that. She promised me power and prestige and a life where everyone would finally take me seriously. And now, Derek laughed through his tears. Now I have nothing, no job, no wife, no future. I'm back where I started, except now I'm alone. Maggie watched him cry. She thought about all the nights she had cried over him. All the tears she had shed in that diner, in that laundromat, on that bench by the waterfront. All the pieces of herself she had given away, hoping he would love them. Derek. He looked up. I'm not going to forgive you. His face crumbled. But I'm not going to destroy you either. Maggie stood up. Not because you deserve mercy, but because destroying you would mean I still care about you. And I don't. Not anymore. What are you saying? I'm saying goodbye. Maggie walked toward the door. For real this time. Not the goodbye you gave me in that diner with your divorce papers and your $20 tip. A real goodbye. The kind where I walk out and never think about you again. Maggie, wait. There's an envelope on the table by the door. Maggie paused with her hand on the knob. Inside, you'll find a check for $50,000 and a letter of recommendation for a job at a law firm in Portland. It's not much, but it's a start. Derek stared at her. Why? Because once, a long time ago, you were kind to me. When my mother died, you held me while I cried. You told me everything would be okay. You made me believe I wasn't alone. I remember. That man is gone. Maggie opened the door. But I owed him something. Consider the debt paid. She stepped into the hallway. Maggie? She stopped, but didn't turn around. I'm sorry. Derek's voice broke. I'm so sorry for everything. Maggie closed her eyes. She thought about accepting his apology. Thought about turning around and telling him it was okay. Thought about being the bigger person. But being the bigger person had cost her 5 years. Goodbye, Derek. She walked away. She didn't look back. The next 6 months were a blur of construction and creation. The Obsidian project had been foreclosed just as Maggie predicted. Kensington Medical Properties acquired the property at auction for 70 cents on the dollar. Preston Whitmore watched from the back of the courtroom as his dream was sold to his former daughter-in-law's ex-wife. He tried to approach Maggie afterward. Mrs. Kensington. His voice was hoarse, broken. Please, can we talk? There's nothing to talk about, Mr. Whitmore. I'm ruined. My family has been in this business for 3 generations. Everything my grandfather built, everything my father expanded, it's all gone. You did that yourself. Maggie tucked the deed into her briefcase. I just waited for the pieces to fall. At least tell me why. Preston's eyes were desperate. Why did you target us? We never did anything to you. Your daughter called me a dishwasher? Maggie's voice was ice. Your son-in-law left me in a diner with $43 to my name. And you taught them both that people like me don't matter. I didn't know. That's the problem, Mr. Whitmore. You never bothered to know. Maggie started walking toward the exit. You looked at a nurse in scrubs and saw nothing. You saw a stepping stone, a nobody, someone who existed only to serve people like you. I'm sorry. I'm not interested in your apologies. Maggie pushed open the courthouse doors. I'm interested in your property, and now I have it. The construction began in March. Maggie had renamed the project. It was no longer the Obsidian. That name belonged to Preston's failed ambition. The new building would be called the Grace after her mother. It would be a 20-story, mixed-use development. The bottom 5 floors would be affordable housing for healthcare workers, nurses, orderlies, medical technicians. The middle 10 floors would be commercial medical offices, and the top 5 floors would be premium hospital space equipped with the latest technology. Dorothy visited the construction site in April. It's going to be beautiful, Dorothy said, watching the steel skeleton rise against the Seattle sky. Eleanor would be proud. I hope so. She would be. Dorothy squeezed Maggie's hand. She spent her whole life trying to make healthcare accessible to everyone. She just forgot that accessibility starts with the workers, not the patients. You remembered. I was one of those workers. Maggie's voice was soft. I know what it's like to work a 12-hour shift and then worry about making rent. I know what it's like to choose between buying groceries and paying for gas to get to work. And now I can make sure other people don't have to make those choices. Harold approached with his tablet. We have a situation. What kind of situation? Derek Holloway took the job in Portland. Harold showed her a news article. He's been working at a small family law firm for the past 3 months. Apparently, he's become something of an advocate for domestic abuse survivors. Maggie read the article. It featured a photograph of Derek in a modest suit standing next to a woman and her 2 children. The headline read, Local attorney helps mother escape abusive husband, wins custody battle. He's helping people. Apparently. Harold's voice was neutral. He's also been attending therapy and AA meetings, and he's been donating half his salary to a shelter for homeless women. Maggie stared at the photograph. This wasn't the Derek she had known. This wasn't the man who had abandoned her for a richer woman. This was someone else. Someone who had been broken and was trying to put himself back together. Good for him, she said finally. You're not angry. Why would I be angry? Maggie handed back the tablet. I wanted him to suffer. He suffered. I wanted him to understand what he lost. He understands. And now he's trying to become a better person. And that doesn't bother you? No. Maggie turned back to the construction site. It means I was right to let him go. Dorothy smiled. Eleanor always said revenge was a waste of time. She said the best thing you could do to someone who wronged you was become so successful they couldn't ignore you. Is that what I'm doing? I don't know. Dorothy looked at the steel and concrete rising toward the sky. What do you think you're doing? Maggie considered the question. A year ago, she had been a nurse with $43 in her bank account. She had been homeless, hopeless, and heartbroken. She had signed divorce papers in a diner and watched her husband walk away with another woman. Now she was standing on property worth $200 million, watching a building rise that would help thousands of people. She had money, power, and influence. She had everything Derek had wanted and more. But she was also alone. She was also exhausted. She was also wondering if any of it mattered. "I think I'm trying to prove something," Maggie admitted. "To myself, to Derek, to everyone who ever looked at me and saw nothing." "And have you proved it?" "I don't know." Maggie watched a crane swing a steel beam into place. "I thought I would feel different by now. I thought success would fill the empty space inside me. But it doesn't. It just echoes." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor felt the same way," she said finally. "After she built her fortune, after she conquered her enemies, after she proved everyone wrong, she felt empty too." "What did she do about it?" "She found you." Dorothy's voice was gentle. "She spent 30 years looking for someone worthy. Someone who would use her money for good. Someone who would fill the emptiness with purpose instead of revenge." "Did it work?" "I don't know. She died before she could find out." Dorothy turned to face Maggie. "But she believed in you. She believed you were different. She believed you would find your own way." Maggie looked at the building, the Grace, her mother's name etched into concrete and steel, a monument to love instead of hate, a legacy built on helping instead of hurting. "I think I understand now," Maggie said quietly. "Understand what? Why my grandmother left me everything." Maggie took a deep breath. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't about revenge or power or proving myself. It was about this, about taking something broken and making it beautiful. "And Derek." Maggie thought about the photograph. Derek standing with the woman and her children. Derek helping people instead of hurting them. Derek trying to become someone worthy of the second chance she had given him. "Derek is doing the same thing," Maggie said. "In his own way. He's taking something broken himself and trying to make it better." "Does that make what he did okay?" "No." Maggie's voice was firm. "Nothing will ever make it okay. But it makes it done. Finished. Something I can finally put behind me." Harold's phone buzzed. "The ribbon-cutting ceremony has been scheduled," he announced. "The Grace will officially open in 3 months. Every news outlet in the Pacific Northwest wants to cover it." "Good." Maggie straightened her shoulders. "Let them come. Let them see what a forgotten nurse can build." Dorothy smiled. "Your grandmother would be so proud." "I hope so." Maggie looked up at the building one more time. "I really hope so." Her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "I saw the article about the Grace. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. I'm sorry I never saw it before." Maggie stared at the message. She thought about responding. Thought about telling Derek that she forgave him. Thought about saying something kind, something generous, something that would prove she had moved on. But moving on didn't mean reconnecting. Moving on meant letting go. She deleted the message. "Is everything okay?" Dorothy asked. Maggie put her phone away. "Everything is perfect." She turned away from the past and walked toward the future. The building rose behind her, reaching for the sky, carrying her mother's name toward the clouds. The Grace. A monument to everything Maggie had lost. A foundation for everything she was about to gain. 1 year later, the Grace opened its doors. Maggie stood on the rooftop observation deck, watching the crowd gather below. News crews jostled for position. Politicians practiced their smiles. And hundreds of nurses, orderlies, and healthcare workers, the people this building was made for, waited to see inside their new home. "Nervous?" Dorothy asked. "Terrified." "Good." Dorothy handed her a glass of water. "Eleanor always said fear meant you were doing something that mattered." Harold appeared at the door. "The mayor is ready. The ribbon cutting begins in 5 minutes." Maggie took a deep breath. She thought about the woman she had been 2 years ago, the nurse in wet scrubs, sitting on a bench by the waterfront, with $43 in her bank account and nowhere to go. That woman felt like a stranger now. "Let's go." The elevator descended. Maggie's heart pounded with each floor. 40, 35, 30, 25. There's something you should know, Harold said suddenly. Now. Derek is here. Maggie's blood froze. What? He arrived 30 minutes ago. Security spotted him in the crowd. He hasn't tried to approach the building. He's just watching. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I wanted you to decide how you feel. Harold met her eyes. Do you want him removed? Maggie thought about it. Derek, here, on the day of her greatest triumph, watching from the crowd like a ghost from another life. No. The word surprised her. Let him stay. Are you sure? I'm sure. Maggie straightened her shoulders. I'm not afraid of him anymore. I'm not afraid of anyone. The elevator doors opened. The noise hit her like a wave cheering applause, cameras clicking, reporters shouting questions. Maggie walked through the crowd, her heels clicking on the polished floor, her head held high. She didn't look for Derek. She didn't need to. The podium waited. The microphone waited. The whole city waited. Maggie stepped up and looked out at the sea of faces. 2 years ago, she began. I was a nurse working the night shift at Seattle General. I made $12 an hour. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment with a husband who told me I wasn't good enough. And I believed him. The crowd went silent. I believed him because I had spent my whole life being told I wasn't enough. Not smart enough. Not pretty enough. Not ambitious enough. I was invisible. A nobody. Someone who existed only to serve other people. Maggie's voice grew stronger. Then my husband divorced me. He told me I didn't fit his future. He told me I smelled like stale coffee and desperation. He left $20 on the table and walked away with another woman. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I thought my life was over. I had $43 in my bank account. I had nowhere to go. I spent the night in a laundromat pretending to wash clothes just to stay warm. Maggie paused. And then I discovered something. I discovered that my grandmother, a woman I had never met, had been watching me my whole life. She had built a billion-dollar empire, and she had chosen me to inherit it. Not because I was special, not because I was talented, but because I was kind. She looked out at the nurses in the crowd, the orderlies, the medical technicians, the people who made hospitals work. My grandmother believed that character matters more than credentials. She believed that the people who clean bedpans and change sheets and hold dying patients' hands are the backbone of healthcare. And she was right. Maggie gestured at the building behind her. This is the Grace. It's named after my mother who died of cancer when I was 22. The bottom 5 floors are affordable housing for healthcare workers. The middle floors are medical offices. And the top floors are a state-of-the-art hospital. This building exists because I know what it's like to work a double shift and still not afford rent. I know what it's like to choose between groceries and gas money. I know what it's like to be invisible. Her voice dropped. I built this because I never want anyone to feel that way again. The applause started slowly. 1 person, then 10, then 100. Then the whole crowd was on its feet, cheering, crying, reaching toward her like she was something holy. Maggie cut the ribbon. The doors opened, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt something other than empty. She felt whole. The reception lasted 3 hours. Maggie shook hands until her arm ached. She smiled until her face hurt. She answered questions until her voice was hoarse. But she kept looking for Derek. She couldn't help it. Every time she turned around, she expected to see him there. Expected him to approach her with some excuse, some apology, some attempt to worm his way back into her life. He never did. Finally, at 9 p.m., the crowd began to thin. Maggie excused herself from a conversation with the governor and walked toward the private elevator. She needed air. She needed silence. She needed to be alone. The rooftop was empty except for one figure. Derek. He stood at the railing looking out at the city lights. His suit was simple, not cheap, but not expensive either. His hair was shorter than she remembered. His shoulders were straighter. Security let you up, Maggie said. It wasn't a question. Harold did. Derek didn't turn around. He said you'd want to talk. Did he? He was wrong, wasn't he? Derek finally faced her. You don't want to talk. You just want me gone. Maggie walked to the railing. She stood beside him, close enough to touch but miles apart. What are you doing here, Derek? I had to see it. His voice was quiet. The building, the crowd, you. He shook his head. I had to see what you became. And what did you see? A woman I don't recognize. Derek's eyes were wet. A woman who's stronger and smarter and more powerful than anyone I've ever known. A woman who took everything I threw away and turned it into something beautiful. I didn't do it for you. I know. Derek wiped his eyes. That's what makes it hurt. They stood in silence. The city sparkled below them, a million lights, a million lives, a million stories unfolding in the darkness. I read about your work in Portland, Maggie said finally. It's nothing compared to this. It's not nothing. Maggie turned to look at him. You're helping people, real people, women who were abandoned just like I was, children who were caught in the middle just like we never had to be. I'm trying to make amends. You can't make amends for what you did to me. I know. Derek's voice cracked. But I can try to make sure I never do it to anyone else. Maggie studied his face. She looked for the lies, the manipulation, the charm he had used to control her for 5 years. She didn't find it. All she found was a broken man trying to put himself back together. Why did you really come here, Derek? To apologize. He took a deep breath. A real apology. Not the kind I gave you at the motel. Not the kind where I'm begging for mercy or trying to get something from you. A real apology where I tell you the truth. The truth is that I was the worst thing that ever happened to you. Derek's voice was steady now. I took your love and your sacrifice and your loyalty, and I treated them like garbage. I made you feel small so I could feel big. I told you that you weren't enough because I was terrified that I wasn't enough. Derek. Let me finish. He held up his hand. I spent the last year in therapy trying to understand why I did what I did. And the answer is simple. I was scared. I was scared of being poor. Scared of being invisible. Scared of being the nobody my father always said I was. So you became somebody by hurting me. Yes. Derek didn't flinch. I climbed over you to get to Vanessa. I used you as a stepping stone just like I said. And the worst part is that I knew it was wrong. I knew I was destroying the best thing that ever happened to me. But I did it anyway. Why? Because I was weak. Derek's eyes filled with tears again. Because I was too scared to believe that your love was enough. Because I thought money and status would fill the hole inside me, when the truth is that you were the only thing that ever did. Maggie felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But something else. Something that felt like understanding. I'm not going to take you back, Derek. I know. I'm not going to forgive you. I know that too. Then why are you here? Derek reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Because I needed to give you this. Maggie took the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper and something small wrapped in tissue. She unfolded the paper first. It was a check, made out to the Grace Foundation, for $100,000. That's everything I have saved in the last year, Derek said. Every penny I didn't spend on rent or food or therapy. I wanted to go to the nurses, the ones who work double shifts and can't afford childcare, the ones who were like you. Maggie stared at the check. I can't accept this. Yes, you can. Derek's voice was firm. It's not a gift. It's not an apology. It's a debt. I owe you 5 years of my life, 5 years of your sacrifice and your love and your loyalty. $100,000 doesn't begin to cover it, but it's a start. Derek. Open the other thing. Maggie unwrapped the tissue. Inside was a ring. Not a diamond ring. Not an expensive ring. A simple silver band with a small blue stone. Her mother's ring. Where did you get this? You left it in the apartment. Derek's voice was thick. When you moved out. It was in your jewelry box. I kept it. I told myself I was going to pawn it, but I never could. It was the only thing of yours I had left. Maggie held the ring up to the light. She remembered her mother wearing it. Remembered the way it caught the light when Grace was cooking dinner, or reading a book, or holding Maggie's hand during a thunderstorm. This was hers. I know. Derek stepped back. It belongs to you. It always belonged to you. Maggie slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me. Derek walked toward the elevator. I'm not giving it to you because I want something. I'm giving it to you because it's right. Because for once in my miserable life I want to do the right thing. Derek. He stopped. The check. The ring. The apology. Maggie's voice was stronger now. It doesn't change anything between us. You know that, right? I know. We're not going to be friends. We're not going to reconnect. This is the last time we'll ever see each other. I know that too. Then why do it? Derek turned to face her one last time. Because you deserve to know that you changed me. His voice was quiet. Not the money. Not the power. You. The woman who loved me when I had nothing. The woman who believed in me when no one else did. You changed me, Maggie. And even though I destroyed what we had, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the love you gave me. He stepped into the elevator. Goodbye, Maggie. The doors closed. He was gone. Maggie stood alone on the rooftop holding her mother's ring, watching the city lights blur through her tears. She didn't know how long she stayed there. Minutes. Hours. Long enough for the tears to stop. Long enough for the pain to fade. Long enough to realize that something inside her had finally healed. Harold found her at midnight. The last guests have left. Dorothy is waiting in the car. I'll be down in a minute. Harold started to leave, then paused. Was it what you expected? What? Seeing him again. Hearing his apology. Harold's voice was gentle. Was it what you expected? Maggie looked at the ring on her finger. No, she admitted. It was better. Better how? I thought I needed him to suffer. I thought I needed him to grovel and beg and destroy himself. Maggie shook her head. But that's not what I needed. What I needed was to see him become someone worthy of the love I gave him, even if I never give it to him again. And has he? I don't know. Maggie walked toward the elevator. But he's trying, and maybe that's enough. The next morning, the Grace was on the front page of every newspaper in Washington state. The headlines were glowing. Billionaire nurse opens revolutionary healthcare complex. Waitress to wealth. The incredible story of Maggie Kensington. Local woman builds empire on kindness. Maggie read them all. Then she put down the newspapers and went to work. There was so much to do. Buildings to manage, employees to hire, patients to care for, a grandmother's legacy to honor. She worked 16-hour days. She learned every nurse's name. She visited every floor, every unit, every room. She wanted the Grace to be more than a building. She wanted it to be a family. 6 months later, she received a letter. It was from Mrs. Okonkwo. The elderly patient Maggie had cared for at Seattle General, the one with congestive heart failure and early-stage dementia, had been transferred to a private care facility just as Harold had promised. But now she had a new request. She wanted to move to the Grace. She says she wants to be closer to you, Harold explained. She says you're the only family she has left. Maggie visited her that afternoon. Mrs. Okonkwo was thinner than Maggie remembered, frailer, but her eyes still sparkled when she saw Maggie walk through the door. "There's my girl." Mrs. Okonkwo reached for her hand. "There's my beautiful girl." "Hello, Mrs. O." Maggie sat beside the bed. "I heard you want to move." "I want to come home." Mrs. Okonkwo squeezed her hand. "Your building, the one with your mother's name, that's home now." "It's not a nursing facility. It's mostly apartments and offices." "Then make me an apartment." Mrs. Okonkwo's voice was firm. "Put me somewhere I can see you, somewhere I can watch you work, somewhere I can be proud of what you've become." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "I'll make it happen." "I know you will." Mrs. Okonkwo smiled. "You always make things happen. That's why I love you." 2 weeks later, Mrs. Okonkwo moved into a corner apartment on the 5th floor of the Grace. She had a view of the waterfront. She had nurses who visited her 3 times a day. And she had Maggie who came every evening to bring her chocolate pudding and listen to stories about her late husband. "You remind me of him," Mrs. Okonkwo said one night. "Your husband, he was kind too." Mrs. Okonkwo's voice was dreamy. "Kind and strong and stubborn. He built things. Not buildings. People. He built people up when the world tore them down." "That's what I'm trying to do." "You're succeeding." Mrs. Okonkwo patted her hand. "Your grandmother would be proud. Your mother would be proud. I'm proud." Maggie held the old woman's hand until she fell asleep. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the city. Seattle sparkled in the darkness. The Space Needle glowed. The ferries cut white lines across the black water. Somewhere out there, Derek was rebuilding his life. Somewhere out there, Preston Whitmore was selling his last remaining property. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was planning her 3rd engagement. But Maggie didn't think about them anymore. She thought about her grandmother, who had watched her from a distance and believed she was worthy. She thought about her mother, who had died too young, but lived long enough to teach Maggie how to love. She thought about Mrs. Okonkwo, who had no one in the world except a nurse who brought her pudding. And she thought about herself. The woman she had been. The woman she had become. The woman she was still becoming. Her phone buzzed. A message from Harold. 3 more buildings acquired today. The Kensington Medical Network now spans 52 states and 4 countries. Congratulations. Maggie smiled. She typed back, "This is just the beginning." Because it was. 2 years ago, she had been a nurse with $43 in her bank account. Now she was the head of a healthcare empire worth over $2 billion. But the money had never been the point. The point was this: every person deserves to be seen. Every worker deserves to be valued. Every broken heart deserves a chance to heal. Maggie had learned that the hard way, and she would spend the rest of her life making sure no one else had to. The city lights twinkled below her. The building hummed with life, and Margaret Rose Kensington, once a forgotten nurse, now the most powerful woman in Seattle, stood at the window and watched the future unfold. She had inherited a billion-dollar empire, but she had built something far more valuable. She had built a legacy. She had built a home. She had built herself. Derek had wanted someone who fit his future. He had thrown her away because she smelled like coffee and wore scrubs and worked double shifts to keep him fed. He had no idea. He had no idea that the woman he discarded would become the woman who changed everything. He had no idea that the nurse he left in a diner would become the empress of an empire. He had no idea that sometimes the people who look like nothing are the ones who become everything. But Maggie knew. She had always known. And now, standing at the top of the building she had built, wearing the ring her mother had worn, surrounded by the people she had saved. Maggie Kensington finally understood the truth her grandmother had been trying to teach her all along. You don't need someone else to make you worthy. You don't need money or power or status to matter. You just need to be kind. You just need to be strong. You just need to be you. The rest will follow. It always does. Maggie turned away from the window. She had work to do. She had people to help. She had a world to change. And she was just getting started.